Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we're going to be going over 5 strong engineer builds. Our first one is going with the Warthog shotgun as our primary weapon, and we're going to be taking lightweight magazines for it. This is a clean overclock that is very useful. I think it's actually one of the strongest overclocks for the Warthog, even though it is just a clean one. This gives you increased ammo as well as a faster reload, which makes it so you can reload cancel even faster, which is a very useful technique with the Warthog. Potentially a little bit too quick if you take all reload speed with it. I don't think you need all reload speed. So this is how I build light cases with the Warthog. This is kind of my standard go-to build with the Warthog with pretty much every build. However, you can pick whatever you want in Tier 2. In Tier 1, I went with the faster rate of fire, although you could go with larger magazines. Either one of these is a great choice. Tier 2, I like the extra ammo, but really all of these are pretty good. If you want to take tighter choke, you can. If you want to take more damage, you can. Or if you want to take even more ammo, you can. This one's pretty flexible. Bigger magazines in Tier 3, more damage in Tier 4, and then full auto rate of fire in Tier 5. Like I said though, this is a clean overclock, so you can realistically build it however you'd like. However you like taking the Warthog, this one will just be an addition to it. Now, we are also taking a very strong clean overclock for a secondary. For our secondary, we're going to be taking the breach cutter, and this overclock is lightweight cases. This gives us more ammo and a faster reload. Same thing that the Warthog does. This one's also super useful for the breach cutter because just having more ammo for the breach cutter makes it really good. Breach cutter is great for taking care of crowds, great for taking care of big enemies, and you can just shoot it right through any enemy. So you don't even need to be aiming for the weak spot. This is really good on Dreadnought missions, but you can use it on any mission. It's pretty good on everything. You can also shoot it through walls, which is pretty cool. This is the way that I build my breach cutter, so I go with extra magazine size in Tier 1. This is just so that I get even more ammo overall and more from resupplies. Extra ammo in Tier 2. Again, I really like the ammo. You don't really need the extra damage in Tier 2. Wider width, although it's not bad. The quick deploy in Tier 3. You don't really need reload speed with the breach cutter. I'm almost always not reloading the breach cutter. Most of the time I just have board ready, and that's what's reloading it for me. So reload speed doesn't really matter. Same goes with the reload speed on this overclock. It's not really something I'm super interested in, but the rest of it is really good. Stunning Tier 4, but armor breaking is also really good in Tier 4, so pick whichever one you like. And then Plasma Trail in Tier 5. I would recommend either Plasma Trail or the Triple Line Split, but again, this is a clean, so take whatever you'd like. Triple Line Split, for anybody unaware, and I get this question a lot when I'm doing live streams, does it give you triple the damage? It doesn't. It just gives you triple the chances of hitting. So no matter which line you hit with, it'll do the same amount of damage. Even if all 3 lines hit something, it'll just do the damage of 1 line. It just makes it so that there's more room for error there. This build is really strong, and I like taking it as a general purpose build. You have a lot of ammo. It actually takes you a while to run out of ammo, which is a little bit unusual for engineer, because most of the time you can run through ammo pretty quick. This, you have 27 shots in total with the breach cutter, 6 in it, 21 out. And with the Warthog auto shotgun, I believe you have 150 shells out of it and then 8 in it. Your shotgun can still one-shot, headshot normal grunts, so long as you get good pellet spread. So make sure that you're somewhat close. And then the breach cutter can also clear up crowds and big enemies. It should take you longer than normal for you to run out of shots with this build unless you just get into a position where you can spam fire it all at once. The only downside to this build is that it's not incredibly strong at fighting Mactera, and it's not incredibly strong at fighting enemies that want to stay at a range. So menaces and spitters, if they stay at really long range, spitballers too, can be rather annoying. You can take the tighter choke with the Warthog. That will give you longer range, and then you do have somewhat of a ranged option. A breach cutter is pretty much always going to be at medium range, close to medium as to where it's good, just because that's how far the line will actually go before it turns off. You could take the extra projectile life in Tier 1, but it's still about the same range, and the shotgun just performs better at close to medium range too. So range is your limiting factor here. You do have your turrets, so if you stay around your turrets, then things like Mactera shouldn't be an issue. And hopefully spitters aren't either, unless you just get those really annoying menaces or spitballers that are all the way across on the other side of the map. Moving on to our second strong build for the engineer, we have one of my personal favorites. We are going to be taking the Loki, or the Lock 1, or the Lock On, or whatever you want to call the rifle, the smart rifle. We are going to be taking this with explosive chemical rounds. What explosive chemical rounds does is whenever you have 3 locks, or I guess you have to have 3 locks onto a target, but the last lock, when you shoot, or the last shot that hits and kills the enemy, will then explode, dealing damage to not only the enemy that you hit, but also all enemies around it. Again, assuming you didn't kill it with whatever the shot. It will still explode though. This deals 50 damage to all enemies around it. It deals explosive damage, so that's a flat amount of damage. There is no damage reduction from that, I don't believe. Maybe certain enemies have reduction from that, but for the most part, it doesn't really seem to matter. It also does a high amount of armor damage, so you can usually knock armor off of things, and it does have a fear on it too that scares away things. Downside is that you lose out on direct damage, which isn't a huge deal because the explosive damage is definitely going to make up for that, and then you also lose out on ammo. That one's a bit more of a big deal. However, this is still probably the most ammo efficient Loki that you can run. So the way that I like running it is like this. This is going with extra ammo in tier 1. You don't really need extra damage because, again, a lot of your damage is coming from the explosives, so I find that to be a pretty useful choice. We're going to be taking macro lens in tier 2. Usually in tier 2, this is personal preference. However, on this one, I would say that the macro lens is a really good addition because it makes it so you have a tight field that you can target onto something and you get longer range, and you're really only trying to put 3 locks on something. That's kind of the key to using this rifle once you have explosive chemical rounds on it. You want to just put 3 locks on something and just use it as a burst rifle. So once you have 3, just let it go 3 again, let it go, unless of course you're just putting a bunch of locks onto something like a swarmer or something like that, then just whatever, because 1 lock will hit it and it cause the explosion. And you really don't want to be holding this down on bigger enemies, because bigger enemies you'll hit with all of your 11 shots and then the 12th shot will cause the explosion. You want to make sure that it's 3, that way the 3rd will cause the explosion. You'll get more damage out of your gun that way. In tier 3, we're going to go with the electrochemical rounds. This makes it so you get 20% more damage when an enemy is electrocuted or on fire or both, because these do stack together. In tier 4, we're going with the faster lock-ons, and then in tier 5, we're going with the electric generator. This makes it so every 3rd lock from the shot will also cause the enemy to be electrocuted, which makes it so you can stack up even more damage. So you're going to go 3 shots onto one enemy, 3 shots onto that same enemy. The next time around, it has electricity. It's already been hit by 1 explosion. It's going to get hit again, but it's going to get hit harder because it's affected by the electricity, and there's going to be another explosion on top of this. So this alone is already pretty strong, but we're going to be pairing it with another option because, you know, we could get that extra 20% from fire. So with our secondary, we're once again going to be taking the breach cutter, and this time we're going to be taking Inferno with it. What Inferno does is cut down on your overall damage from the breach cutter by 175 damage per second, which sounds like a lot, but when the breach cutter has 575, it's not a huge downside to this. This also makes it so your breach cutter can light things on fire and deals fire damage, and it lights things on fire very fast, so this works really good against bots, especially turrets. We also have one other downside with this, and that is that we don't have as good of armor breaking. This will nerf our overall armor breaking, but that's usually okay if something's on fire, and the explosive chemical rounds will knock the armor off of just about anything that we're shooting anyway, so that's an okay exchange. The way that I build this is the exact same way that I built the lightweight cases breach cutter, so we're going with larger magazine, more ammo, quick deploy, stun, and the plasma trail. I would really recommend stun with this. Stun is pretty good. You don't really need the armor breaking in tier 4. Stun will usually get more value out of this because then everything's on fire, everything's stunned, and if everything's on fire and stunned and you have plasma trail, everything's also taking passive damage. So it makes it really useful for clearing up crowds, and you can use it for bigger enemies. There's not really a particular thing that this build struggles against. It works really well against everything, against crowds, against big enemies, even against dreadnoughts it works really well. Maybe not as well as some builds that you can make, just because Inferno does nerf the breach cutter then, and you can't light dreadnoughts on fire. Alright, moving on to our 3rd strong build. We are using Stubby as our primary weapon. The electric submachine gun, and our overclock this time is the turret EM Discharge. This one is a really strong and a really weird overclock for Stubby. What this one does is it lowers your overall damage, it also lowers your magazine size, but it now gives you the ability of when you shoot your turrets, that they will explode into this discharge that deals electric damage to all enemies around it, as well as all allies around it, dealing 60 electric damage to everything, as well as causing fear to everything, and slowing down everything because they get electrocuted. This does scale off of the percentage chance that you have of electrocution, so you want to be building Stubby for that, and this is the way that I build Stubby when using turret EM Discharge. This is actually the way that I build Stubby for a lot of builds. This is going with higher electricity chance in tier 1, larger magazines in tier 2, but you can really pick whatever you want in tier 2. I would recommend the higher electricity chance in tier 1 though. It does make it so your turrets are more consistent. For anybody unaware who hasn't used turret EM Discharge in a while, there was a bug, a strategy, I'm not sure what you want to call it, before this where you could put down your turrets and then you could recall them, so long as you just kept recalling the nodes, and then you could shoot the nodes of the turrets. You didn't actually have to build them, at least once you built up the turrets one time. If you completely recalled them, then you would have to build them up again. That's been fixed to where you can no longer do that. You have to build the turrets up entirely for you to actually shoot them and then discharge this. This doesn't cost any ammo of the turret either. I get that question a lot. And no, it's just extra damage on top of there. It does have a short delay. You can't be shooting these all the time. So just don't spray everything at the turret. Just shoot it a couple of times and wait for it to go off, and then wait a second or two. Do it again. Anyway, back to the build. Extra ammo in tier 2, you don't really need damage for this because a lot of your damage is coming from the electricity from the turret EM discharge. And then we have extra electricity damage in tier 4 and the extra arcing electricity in tier 5. This just helps overall. It's not entirely necessary though. You could go with the larger magazine in tier 5 if you really want, or even with the weak spot damage in tier 4. I just like going with all the electricity. This makes it so Stubby is extremely ammo efficient. It takes you a really long time for you to run completely out of shots with Stubby, so long as you're pacing out your shots and shooting your turrets. You don't need 2 turrets for this either. You can just use 1 turret if you want, so it's flexible that way too, unlike potentially Turret Whip and Turret Arc, which tend to benefit more from having 2 turrets. Oh, also, I should mention this. If you are playing Engineer and you have any of the turret perks, whether that be Turret EM Discharge, Turret Arc, or Turret Whip, so 2 of those for Stubby and 1 of them for the Warthog, they work on everybody's turret. So if you have multiple engineers, it can work on all of them. Now, since we have our primary weapon dealing so well with crowds, we have this paired with a secondary that deals extremely well with single targets. We are going to be taking the grenade launcher as our secondary weapon, and we're going to be taking hyper propellant with it. What hyper propellant does is turn your grenade launcher into a railgun. You now no longer really have the same explosion radius, and your AoE damage is much less than it otherwise would be, but your direct damage is far higher, and your projectile velocity is increased massively. So you just fire it directly at whatever the heck you want to hit. It does really high damage, and it works really well. The way that I build this is like this. So we're going with extra ammo in tier 1, extra ammo in tier 2, because this does actually take your ammo down. So this way you have 10 shots, at least outside of the weapon, and 1 shot in it. Then I'm taking fire rounds in tier 3, which you might think fire rounds is a little bit weird, and it kind of is because it doesn't work the same way you might think it does with hyper propellant, because hyper propellant doesn't really do direct damage. It does, but it does direct disintegration damage, which is unaffected by the fire damage. So that's why you can put fire damage on this and still get fire damage plus the direct damage. Armor breaking's a choice here too, but armor breaking is kind of bugged with the explosives, so it doesn't really work the way that it should. And then you don't really need extra movement speed in tier 3. So that's why fire is usually the best option here. Although you could really pick any of these, whatever you want. It is kind of funny to go with the speed because then you pretty much have a hit scan weapon at that point. In tier 4, we're going with the homebrew explosive to potentially randomize our damage, but most of the time this high rolls, and a lot of the time you don't even need it to high roll. This is just kind of useful on like Dreadnought missions if you want to do a little bit more damage. Even if you do low roll with this, you're still going to do massive damage to whatever you hit. So a lot of the times you'll just straight up kill something unless it is like a Dreadnought. And then in tier 5 we are going with Spiky Grenade to up that direct damage even more, because we might as well, right? This is a very hard hitting build that works really well for picking off big threats right away. You can pick off Praetorians, Menaces, Spitballers, really anything, Dreadnoughts. It deals really high damage to Dreadnoughts. Sometimes you can just one-shot their stage with it, which is kind of crazy. I've done that a couple times throughout like elite deep dives where we've had a regular Dreadnought, at least when I've played solo. Multiplayer, I don't think I've ever been able to do that unless it's been in like an IFG grenade or something. But you can just potentially one-shot their stage, so once you break their armor, just hit them once with that, and then we move on to the next stage. Again, another build that doesn't really struggle with much. Your turrets and Stubby will take out crowds and it'll be very ammo efficient, and then if there's any big enemies, switch to the grenade launcher, take them out quickly. Moving on to our 4th build, and we are going back to the Warthog auto shotgun. So with this one we are taking mini shells. What mini shells does is give you a whole lot more ammo, and it gives you a larger magazine as well as a tighter spread, less recoil. It takes away the stun on the Warthog, and it also lowers your damage, but that's okay with the build that we're going to be running. Build I run is this one. This is very similar to the earlier build that we showed with the Warthog. So we were going with faster rate of fire, but again, either of these in tier 1 are fine. Going with more pellets in tier 2. This one's important because you need this to be able to one-shot headshot grunts on hazard 4 and up. If you don't have this, then you're not going to be able to do that unless there is critical weakness. If there's critical weakness, then you might just want to go full ammo, because then you have a ton of bullets for this weapon. Or if you're planning on going with Turret Whip with this. Turret Whip's another pretty good option if you want to take this one, but you're going to be running through turret ammo when you take that. Tier 3, I'm going with the larger magazine, although you can pick whatever. Wouldn't really pick the recoil reduction, it's not really necessary. More damage in tier 4, we do need this as well if we want to be able to one-shot, headshot those grunts. Again, you need both damage bonuses, and then full auto rate of fire in tier 5. Again, if you're going with Turret Whip though, you might want to go with extra ammo and then go with Turret Whip in tier 5. I usually use mini shells as a general purpose weapon. It actually works really well for that. You can pick off things at most ranges fairly quickly. It works well at close range, as you would kind of hope a shotgun would, and it works decently well at longer ranges against things like web and acid spitters. For a secondary though, since we're taking something that has so much ammo, we're going to be taking a secondary that doesn't really have much ammo at all. We're going to be taking Fat Boy. This is the nuke grenade launcher. This one gives you massive AoE damage and gives you a much larger AoE. It also makes it so all of your shots are nukes that deal terrain damage and cause a nuclear cloud once they go off, so this causes radiation damage, which will damage everything in the area. That can be a good and a bad thing. It's really easy to blow yourself up and blow teammates up with nukes. You can also blow up materials with them, so you can use it for mining. You're not going to be able to use it very much because you don't have very many nukes, even if you're going to full ammo, which I am. This is the build that I'm running up here. Oh yeah, your grenades also move slower, I should say that too. So aim a little bit higher than what you think you need to, unless you plan on going with the extra velocity in tier 3. I'm not. I'm going with extra ammo in tier 1 and tier 2. This is so that we can have a total of 5 nukes. And that's all we get, so use them wisely. They work really well against crowds, and they work really good if you have lures. Shoot a nuke and then throw the lure in the middle of it. You'll just have all sorts of bugs swarming in and dying pretty quickly from that. Tier 3, I'm going with fire, because we might as well have fire nukes. Why not? Again, you could go with the faster moving projectiles in tier 3. That one's fine too. Going with bigger AoE in tier 4, because, again, why not? You don't need it. You could pick any of these in tier 4. And then going with spiky grenades in tier 5, just in case we need to hit something directly to deal a little bit more damage to it. You could run proxy trigger in this, but that's kind of dangerous, because proxy trigger can make it so the grenade bounces back to you, and again, you can blow yourself up pretty easy. It does give you a bigger AoE though, and it can be really fun, but kind of dangerous compared to the spiky grenade. With this build, you're kind of limited on range, because you're going to be using the Warthog to fight most things at close, medium, and longer ranges, and you're just going to be saving the grenade launcher for large crowds. That's about it. It doesn't do incredibly well against big single targets like dreadnoughts. It can do okay against them, but it's not the best. It's not as good as something like hyper propellant. So a very fun build, but kind of a dangerous build for everybody involved. You also might want to take the perk friendly so that you don't blow yourself up or blow friends up. Friendly doesn't affect the damage that you deal to yourself, but it does affect the damage that you deal to friends, and that also counts for the radiation damage, so they take less radiation damage when they are friendly. And then we move on to our 5th and final build for today, where we are once again going to be using the Loki Smart Rifle, and this time we're going to be using Executioner. Executioner is a fantastic overclock. It gives you even more damage when you're hitting weak spots. It gives you 50% more damage, at least when you're at full locks. It also gives you twice the lock-on speed, which is very nice. Downsides of this, though, is that you lose out on 12 maximum ammo, both in the gun and just in total. And you also lose out on the number of locks you have. Losing out on the number of locks really doesn't matter that much, though, because you're just trying to get to the max amount of locks, and since you can do it so fast, this adds to it, especially since 2 of your tier 5 options want you to have max locked on. So the way that I build this is usually like this. I go with extra damage in tier 1, but extra ammo is a good choice too. I've switched between both of them. I find that they're both really useful. Just depends on what you want. Do you want more DPS, or do you want more ammo once you get resupplies? In tier 2, I go with zoom lens to have a little bit longer reach. This one's personal preference though, pick whichever one you want. Tier 3, I go with blow-through rounds so that we can potentially get even more damage out of our bullets. I like that a bit more than the other options, especially smart locks. You don't really want smart locks on this one. In tier 4, I go with the faster lock-ons. Again, we don't really need more locks, we just want faster locks. This isn't a huge buff though, so if you're like, no, I kind of want more locks, the other locks are pretty good too. I've used both of them. I just usually go with the fast locks because why not? And then more damage in tier 5 so that we get even more out of it. This one deals massive damage to anything that you're hitting, so long as you're hitting it in a weak spot, and you're going to want to try to do that. You can aim the Loki shots when they're locked on. You just have to follow the trail and then kind of try to lead them to the weak spots, so wherever that might be on the bug or on the robot. And then we're going to be pairing this with a secondary that can take out crowds, since our primary does so well against big enemies. We're going to be running the Shard Diffractor with this one, and we're going to be running the Plasticrete Catalyst. This one is a super fun and very odd overclock overall. What this one does is allow you to shoot your platforms, and if you hold your laser on them for so long, it will then cause your platform to explode, dealing very high damage to all enemies around it, as well as all allies. You can blow yourself up with this one pretty easy too. This explosion that you do deals 300 damage to all enemies in the explosion radius, and it also causes fear to all enemies. It works kind of similar to the explosive chemical rounds. It does cut down on your total ammo, and it makes it so your recharge time is longer, but that's not a huge deal. The way that I build it is like this, with extra ammo in tier 1 so that we can just use it more often. Extra AoE in tier 2, but either of these options are pretty good in tier 2. Pick whichever one you like. Tier 3, faster charge up, kind of make up for the one that we had. This way we go back to the normal charge up, but if you want the larger magazine, you can take that too. Fire in tier 4, again, if you want flames. If you want armor breaking, that's a good choice as well. This one's pretty flexible. And then the Dazzler module in tier 5, although the biomass converter is also pretty useful. Dazzler just slows things down so that we can blow them up potentially better. Again, this one works really well with lures. If you shoot down a platform and then throw a lure on top of it, and then you just hold this down on the platform, and it'll clear up crowds, it'll clear up big things. It clears up the Omen Tower surprisingly fast. This build will probably take the most getting used to out of all the builds that I recommended here though, because it does function quite a bit differently than the other ones. Either way, it's a super fun build and you should check it out. There are a lot of really strong engineer builds and we went through 5 of them. We're going to be doing 5 very fun builds with all of the classes next. And then we're probably going to circle back around to 5 more strong builds because there was a lot more strong builds that I wanted to talk about. Thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. I hope this kind of helped you out, and tell me what your favorite builds are down in the comments below. If you guys are new here and you'd like to see more of these videos, be sure that you get subscribed. That way you get notifications whenever I post them. Special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos just like this. And if you would like to see more of my Deep Rock builds, be sure to click over here on this playlist right now. That'll take you to a full list of them. Thanks everybody. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.